Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, next is the second part of our conversation with ESPN's Kevin Arnovitz, talking about coaches, including a name in the news, Darvin Ham. That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Fridays, and sometimes on weekends. Andy, no matter how you get your podcasts, where you get your podcasts, what you like to listen to them on, we provide it for you, never behind a paywall, always trying to get content up to you as quickly as we can. Locked On Lakers on YouTube, you get the podcast a little bit early, so plus you get to look at us, which is awfully fun. We'll get to our interview with Kevin Arnovitz here in a second, the second part of it. If you haven't listened to Monday's episode, go back and do that. It is a great setting for what's coming up for the Lakers, talking about super teams and what can be done with them. And it was funny, Andy, before we get to the second part of this on coaching, like the comments section for Monday's show was all over the place, like in a good way. Like people between you got to blow it up to you can't blow it up. You've got LeBron to there's hope to there's no hope. It says to me the Lakers are in a really difficult spot because nobody seems to have any idea of what the right direction might be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if you believe in LeBron and AD as a foundation still and their ability to, at least for one more season over, say, the next 2 or 3, depending how long you think LeBron's going to be there, if you believe in that in a foundational way, then you at least believe the Lakers are in a decent place to hopefully thread a very difficult needle in building a roster around them without a ton of flexibility or options. Where it really gets complicated, though, is if you're somebody like me who has become very concerned that the two of them together with their recent injury concerns no longer constitute as reliable a foundation, even while acknowledging they are both really talented. The talent is not the issue. It's the reliability to keep them both on the floor at the same time.
Well,
that's the problem. So I say this just so, because there's another thing addressing the comments section. The people saying that we're just here now to bleep on LeBron. No, we're not bleeping on LeBron to acknowledge this stuff. LeBron's still great, full stop. It's the practicality of it, not the measurement of the man's talent.
Well, I'll say this too. It's like, I would say even the even more difficult place is the squishy middle, which is I don't think you're going to do any better right now. And I think you're trading these guys at the low of their value. If you try to move them, reliability questions are real, no matter how you slice it. And that makes it even more challenging to try to figure out, okay, you don't really like what's behind door number 2, which is try to trade them. And you don't love what's in front of door number 1 because, there's risk. Anyway, welcome to the off season. All right. Second part of our interview with Kevin Arnovitz. We start with coaching and the idea that the Lakers can't, Andy, hire a new coach, somebody who's never been a head coach before, because the Lakers just aren't a starter job.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to kind of start of what the job is. And recently, the job has been nothing but a source of aggravation and humiliation for the person who's held it. Right? And I'm dead serious. I'm not trolling.
No, but you're not wrong. It's just
right. I mean, let's just go back to. I mean, let's just take them backwards. Right? Frank Vogel, this is a man who had to get permission from the front office to bench a player in the fourth quarter who was, worthy of being benched, and that, was funny. When the report of, hey, Russ is not happy about fourth quarter benching, he shouldn't be. The interesting tidbit to me was in that 6th paragraph, which was he got the blessing, Vogel got the blessing or approval of. It's like, you can't have, that does not work. You cannot have a system whereby a coach, championship coach, has to get a sign off from your player agent GM.
Well, the good news is, Kevin, he could probably have just asked Kurt, who was sitting in on the coaches' meetings anyway.
Right. I mean, you can't have, look, it's, by the way, there are times when a GM will sit on a coaching meeting. By the way, I support that, every once in a while, but it should be under the auspices of, coming to the coach and saying, hey, look, I'm just doing it's my quality control. I want to see how I want to hear what your assistants are inputting. This is not, hey, just know I'm not here to kind of give you a grade. It's here to kind of, I watch games, and this is important. Coaches meetings are important. You learn a lot. One NBA head coach let me in on a week's worth of coaches meeting during a homestand a few years ago. I was not allowed to bring a tape recorder or even a notebook, and I was everything off the record. But I'd asked him, I was like, I want to understand the job more. I see you for 2.5 hours coaching a game. I want to understand how it works. And I begged him, and he let me. And it was the most educational. First of all, it humbled me. You realize how little of the curriculum you actually see.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the important thing is to sort of zoom out and say, what is the job? We can go back. Frank, Luke Walton, source of humiliation and aggravation. Who was before?
Byron Scott.
Oh, God. That guy went from, hey, scrappy teams to, to, now he's just, do you ever hear his name mentioned?
D'Antoni,
yeah.
Mike Brown.
Mike Brown, terrible experience for him. And, by the way, and hasn't gotten a real sniff in several years. By the way, I think he's very capable, and I'd like to see him.
We talked about it at length on Friday's show.
I've written this in the piece. Do you know he's 3 years younger than Nick Nurse?
We were both amazed.
He's 100. I think he's 100 days younger than Sam Cassell.
Yeah, we were really amazed when we recently looked up his age and verified it. And as Brian noted during this show, it really just put into light just how young he was when he got hired by the Cavs for that first tour of duty.
Because he was one of these kind of Spurs disciple prodigies, and he was a great coach, and he still is. But so the question is now let's drill down a little more. Is the job, hey, you're basically managing LeBron and AD, making sure you're the connector between them and the front office, right? Because that's really what this means is you're sort of you mediate that, because those are the two power centers of the organization. You, dear coach, are going to be expendable. And that's generally what the front office is told Laker coaches, to the point where Ty Lue said, never freaking mind. Monty Williams said, never freaking mind. This is not, I would argue this is not a desirable job. Now, every job is desirable, but there's a reason two guys who wanted to get back in said, never mind. And so is that the job? And if that's the job, I think it's a stupid way to characterize the job, or not characterize it. It's a stupid way to design the job. But if that's the job, that's the job. So who do you want? You might not want, I can tell you, brilliant assistant coaches, who will be, I think, are going to be really successful head coaches, but they're not the people for your job. You need to just get somebody, and that might be Sam. I can imagine it.
Here's where, just to underscore what you're saying in terms of it being an unappealing setup, it's if you're just going to be sort of that middle manager between what happens, in the gym and in the arena and the front office. Okay, that's the job you sign up for. But like you talked about with benching Russell Westbrook and having to go get permission, and essentially the front office getting your back on that, you ultimately didn't have their back anyway because they fired you.
Right.
So it's like you get nothing from that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. So is that the job? Or is the job, are they saying, hey, it's a year of managing these guys, and then we're going to bring it in,
right,
and then we're going to really start rebuilding. So we want someone who both has experience, sort of probably a former player who has organizational and player development chops, but also it would be respected by LeBron.
Coming up more with Kevin Arnovitz, but first, Laker fans, you've been hearing me talk about Prize Picks for months. Have you signed up yet? Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You're going to love this app and mixed sport pick'ems, and for a limited time, here's a no-brainer of an offer for all our users. You get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. 1 point. Not hard to figure out who's going to be able to do that, but you got to use the code NBA. That's right, an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans who only use the code NBA. Prize Picks has the best NBA DFS prop game on the market. They offer more NBA props than any other DFS prop operator and offers more superstar players as well as bench players, only recording a handful of minutes each game. And plus, this is the fun part, mixed sport entries. You could take like the over on Giannis points combined with the under on Cody Bellinger home runs. Mix up sports, keep it interesting, weird, fun. Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's easy, safe, fast withdrawals. So again, go to prizepicks.com today. Use the promo code NBA or go to the App Store, download the app. If you're not playing Prize Picks, you honestly don't know what you're missing.
And to me, a name there, and he's got a little Laker history, is Darvin Ham. Right? He's
like
been the
Darvin.
bridesmaid about 4 or 5 different times. He is steeped in buttonholzerian organization. And hey, this needs to be fun. I have I know as a source that he was on the okay list of the LeBron James, Rich Paul sort of, thing last time, that cohort. So, Darvin's gotten shot in the face. Like that has capital. Like it really does with players. He is tough and he is also really smart. And I will tell you this, Mike Budenholzer
won a championship as a player, all that stuff.
Mike Budenholzer suffers no fools. Like he is the pickiest. Like you kind of, I mean, it's all, there are people who find it obnoxious that it's like either you're one of my kind of people or you're not. Either you get it or you don't. He gets it. And there's something to be said for that because look who the graduates are. I think history's treating Kenny Atkinson really well. Quinn Snyder, Taylor Jenkins. I mean, need I go on? And Darvin is a guy who, I think could both mediate and, by the way, do some kind of cool things to help shepherd in a new era because LeBron's not going to be around much longer. And I think, and by the way, somebody who will have difficult conversations with Davis.
Is Darvin Ham both, I guess, as a literal human being and as a concept? Is he the type of person who would tolerate what the Lakers have done with short on years, short on money? And I guess that's as much a question about is the job as appealing now as it once was, where you do just about anything to be the Lakers head coach. I mean, would they have to pay Darvin like what Darvin thinks he's worth?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. By the way, I think Darvin would start with a typical median first-time coach salary, and I think that's something they can afford. But so that's what I would say. I think Darvin would want certain assurances. And, I also think you can I think you could stand up to the Lakers and just be very direct with them in a meeting. Like, this is why I think you've had trouble cultivating a head coach for the long term. This is what I think needs to change in the organization. And I'd love to be a part of this pivot. And by the way, if you're not interested in that pivot, I understand. Maybe this job isn't for me. I mean, it's a little bit of a bluff, but I do think that, I always wonder with people like the Lakers, do they respect that? Are they kind of not the bully, but do they respect people kind of saying that? Because that can be received a couple different ways.
If they learned, they always talk about, not just being a part of Kobe's career, but things that they learned from Kobe. If they really were paying attention, Kobe loved the people that stood up to him. As
Right.
much as there could be conflict with those people in the process of standing up to him, those were the people that he ultimately gelled with the most and that he wanted around them. So they should, I guess, take some lessons from that.
Yeah, and I think so. He's a really interesting thing. Now, if let's say you trade LeBron, and I don't know what you do with AD, and maybe you try to rehabilitate, the body, and he's still a relatively young guy. He's got many years left, and you go there. I mean, I think now you can look at someone interesting. I mean, you could look at a Miami Heat assistant like Chris Quinn or Malik Allen. You could look at maybe you bring in Kenny, who I think is actually a kind of, I don't know if he, by virtue of sort of, there's this assumption that, Kyrie and KD wanted him out. I don't think that's exactly true. I don't think they necessarily were willing to go to bat for him, but I also don't think they were,
because there is a difference. There's a difference.
No, there's a difference. And, Kenny's interesting because I think he's a player development guy at heart, but he's also, I also think he, to the extent that he even had errors there. I mean, I think that could work, and so I think you could go with somebody who's development oriented, who comes from a really winning tradition. Charles Lee, if you want someone a little more
Charles Lee is where?
He's another Milwaukee. He's on the other side of Mike Budenholzer, and he is truly impressed in his 2 interviews. Actually, there might have been a third, I think, in Washington, where he was the runner-up. Yeah. So he's been kind of the runner-up 3 times. And by the way, Imo Udoka was the runner-up or 3rd place or 4th place 5 times. This notion, I think the league is sort of starting to realize that you can't do if he was good, why didn't they hire him, thing. That it's just like, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, these are really difficult jobs to get. But you could go with someone like that. I mean, if LeBron's not around, I don't know if LeBron responds to Will Hardy. A long time. Will Hardy is the most common answer to the parlor question game, who will succeed Pop. Like, he just is. And so, I think you could do that. I think you could totally, go that way if indeed what you're looking for is a rebuild, both in terms of personnel and in terms of culture.
It's so funny, and we'll let you go here because like the head coach is predicated, like you say, the right job is predicated on what the hell is it that you're trying to make this team. And that is,
or do they even know what they want? Do they even know, the Lakers, what they want in a coach, period? I'm not sure they care enough to know what they want.
Well, then go with Darvin, because he covers a lot he can do the development thing. He can do the savvy vet thing. I think he'd be great on a 27-win team that you're building. I think he'd be great too if you have a contender. I think he could do an Udoka style job. I really do. But I like him only because there's some they like Laker bloodlines, and he's got some. But I like him not because is he the most brilliant coach available? Maybe. I don't know. But what I do know is he's one of the most flexible in terms of you could plug him into a lot of different situations. LeBron would respect him, and he could coach up whoever they're they don't have draft picks, of course. So
whatever street free agents they bring in over the summer. Kevin Arnovitz, the great writer from ESPN, taking the time in a very busy playoff to stop and talk with us. We really appreciate it. Would love to do it again at some point. Although you are one of those guys who's smart, you tend to disappear once the season ends. So I will respect. We'll track you down at some point.
This is great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And next time we got to do a little popular culture too. Over the summer?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Over the summer, we got to do a little, seen a lot of interesting movies, read a lot of, there's some stuff here.
Okay. Absolutely.
I haven't read the Klosterman yet. I think maybe we need to do reading and have like a book club on Klosterman. Because it's a 90s thing. And you guys are 90s guys. I'm a 90s.
We are.
True. We are.
Yeah. We're all
we got to do that
old,
next time.
Hairless people. Not a lot of hair reads on our list here of sponsors. Have a great rest of the series. Have a great rest of the playoffs. Again, thank you so much for taking the time.
You bet.
Appreciate it, man.
It's interesting, since we recorded the interview, actually right after we recorded the interview, that's when the news broke that the Lakers would be seeking permission from Milwaukee to talk to Darvin Ham. They have since received it, and so they'll interview the guy. It was both good for our show, but also kind of pointed to what Kevin was talking about in terms of here's a guy who many people, Mark Stein, I was reading on Monday, was saying like he's considered long overdue for this kind of opportunity, and he fits almost any profile that you need out of a head coach. So if they're going to go with a guy who's never had a job before, head job before, he certainly makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys that just fits the profile of respected while he played the game. He was never a star, but he was a role player who carved out a career. He was a bit player on that Pistons championship team in 2004, the one that took out the Lakers. So he, having worked under Mike Brown as part of that staff with the Lakers and then part of that team, he knows what it means both to be a Laker and to beat a Laker. So that's exciting. But and you and I, when we covered Darvin, we both liked him a lot. We both thought you could tell he was respected by the team. But if you ever talk to him, you're like, this is a really bright guy who communicates what he's thinking well. He's approachable. He seems as transparent as you can be in a position that requires you to be totally opaque.
Right. Because I mean, like, if he needs a reference, I'm willing to give it.
I have a feeling
he thinks that'll help.
Brian, I have a feeling you and I referring him can only submarine the man's chances of getting this job.
Stay away, Darvin. All right, so we'll. I want to kind of go back through a couple things in in our conversation with Kevin, because I mean, I'm not going to, I mean, I know, read about Darvin Ham. We've met the guy a few times, but when it comes to assistants, some of the other names that Kevin mentioned, I can't pretend that I know exactly everything that these guys do on their different staffs and all that. And I'm not even sure a lot of the insiders know completely, because the dynamics in these different places vary based on the group. What I'm really interested in is process. And it gets to the question we asked Kevin in the first segment about starter jobs. It gets to who they look at and why they look at them and who they don't look at just as much. So let's talk about that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, and Major League Baseball in full swing. If you are still not quite sure about how the league is going to shake out with baseball right now, how the season's going to end up playing out, go to their preview sections. You can get a lowdown on both the AL and the NL. They are, not surprisingly, enthusiastic about the Dodgers heading into the season and taking a long view. You can get a look at some other teams as well. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the games start.
Okay, so like I said, I maybe you feel differently. I don't know who a lot of these guys are. Really know when it's hard even, I think, sometimes, Andy, to peer inside the staffs, coaching staffs, and to know exactly what Alex Jensen was responsible for on Quinn Snyder's staff. And because it is a collaborative process, and while people have specialties, there's input from across the room, I think. Exceptions are for things like communication, player development, and stuff like that.
Darvin Ham, by the way, has been, among other responsibilities that he's had with Milwaukee or with the Lakers, whoever, player development is actually one of those things. And what's interesting about that, too, that I think fans may not always realize, player development is not just working with the young guys,
right? Like trying to make sure that the first round pick that you have, which by the way the Lakers won't have for the next 800 years, works on that drop step or what. It's that, but it's a lot more.
No, Kobe worked with Darvin Ham during that period, and I think we can all agree, pretty well developed player.
I think
to that
so.
point.
Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested, and there was some news about guys like Mark Jackson and Mike Brown being linked to the Sacramento job that came through over the weekend. I am obviously very interested in who they hire, but I'm really interested in how they get to that point, who they choose to speak to and why, and I think probably, Andy, more importantly, who they don't choose to speak to and why.
A few shows ago, we got a comment from CG asking us about Jeff Van Gundy. Because every year when there's coaching availabilities, Jeff Van Gundy, who's been part of the broadcast team for ESPN for a decade plus at this point, his name always surfaces. And I know there's been at least a couple times that he's been linked to the Lakers throughout this season, because everybody's known Frank Vogel was going to get fired. Mm-hmm. And my response to Van Gundy was, I'd stay away from him. And it's not even because of anything about him as a coach. It's because he hasn't coached in so long. I can't even tell you really what he is as a coach. The last time he coached was the 2006-07 season. It's now 2022, 2023, the season you'd be hiring him for. The league has changed over a couple times since then. I have no idea how Jeff Van Gundy, what he did in the mid-2000s, translates to now. So the reason I bring him up is, to me, if you bring in Jeff Van Gundy, that feels purely like you are trying to win the press conference. You think a big-time, high-profile, you pulled him away from the ESPN booth. That's really splashy. That signals we are serious about this thing. We are pulling out the stops. And you know what? We're the Lakers, and the Lakers can still get anybody we want, as opposed to, are you really thinking this through in terms of who's the best coach?
I completely agree with Van Gundy, and I don't think they're going to bring him in. I don't think Van Gundy's interested in coaching. If he was interested in coaching, he'd be a coach by now.
Gundy does an incredible job. Why would you leave that?
It's the same reason Bill Cowher hasn't actually picked up another head coaching gig, because he's got a spectacular one doing football on TV for a few $1 million a year. And we all saw what happened to John Gruden when he decided that wasn't good enough for him anymore. Mark Jackson is an interesting name because he's theoretically somebody who splits the difference between, big time high profile name, but also somebody who's had success as a head coach, and also someone who's kind of got gravitas. And I'm not a big fan of his because I think when you go back and you read some of the stories about why things went wrong in Golden State, and he had success, but they really took off after he left, and a lot of the workplace issues. It's not even so much what you do on the court. It's how are you getting along with the rest of the organization? How are you working in concert with people and all that? He really seemed to suffer. It's also been a minute since he was a head coach, and I think that matters. And being in the broadcast booth is not the same thing as, say, Mike Brown, who has also not been a head coach for a little bit, but has been an assistant the entire time since then. And so it's okay to be away from the game, but are you still involved in it? And it's fascinating to me that the Kings, who always do this stuff wrong, have both, they're two of the apparently, according to Mark Stein, I was reading on Monday, 2 of the 3 finalists for that job. They're going quickly. The Lakers are going slowly. I think to see what happens to Quinn Snyder, which we should know this week. The Hornets are going slow, but the Kings are trying to move. And those are 2 of the 3 finalists. And as you made the point last week, there's not necessarily a big through line, I think, between Mark Jackson and Mike Brown, other than they both, I guess, are defensive minded coaches for a team that could use some.
I suppose. I mean, Mark Jackson is another guy that I have to really think back to what I thought of Mark Jackson as, or what I guess still think of Mark Jackson as an analyst, and, beyond stylistic issues that personally not my cup of tea, but whatever, in terms of the way he talks about the game, how much I think that actually signals his philosophy about the game. I think it can be too reductive to read too much into it, because I think he and Van Gundy, for better or for worse, play roles as
no question. There's no question.
Right. And Mark Jackson does his thing as a commentator that I'm not quite sure totally speaks to his actual thoughts on the game. If they do, I would say the Lakers would be better off staying away from him. Do
not hire that. Mama, there goes that man you should not hire.
I think people forget a lot of the discontent, or the details of the discontent, on the way out from the Warriors. A lot of cat. I mean, I'll admit I've forgotten about a lot of it.
It was pretty ugly.
Oh, it was pretty ugly.
It was pretty ugly.
He seemed extremely difficult to get along with. But, the flip side is, so did Jason Kidd. And it's early for Jason Kidd's time in Dallas so far, but so far it has been far better than either one of us thought.
Yeah, I mean, I picture myself in the locker room with Mark Jackson as coach, and he's like, if I'm De'Aaron Fox here, I'm moving up higher off that screen, and De'Aaron's in the back of the room going, I am De'Aaron Fox. Do you want me to do that or not? Just you're right. The style kind of gets in the way. This whole idea of retreads is something I've spent a lot of the weekend thinking about, because on the one hand, you hear it all the time. Anybody who's been a head coach once or twice is a quote unquote retread. Mike Brown is a retread. Why would you want that? Or do you want fresh?
Frank Vogel was a retread.
Absolutely. And I understand it's shorthand, but it's also, I feel like it's a useless term, because it does a couple weird things. We have in our sports culture a tendency to want to put somebody in a place, in a box, and keep them there, mostly because it makes this kind of commentary easier. It's you can just say Mark Jackson is this, Mike Brown is that, and whatever. And he was a failure, he was a success, he was, and it forgets we all theoretically get better at our jobs with the first try. We don't do as well, you learn from it, you come back the second one, you're not the same coach that you were in the second one, so you fail again. Well, you look at where Mike Brown, for example, failed with the Lakers. That was a horrendous context that I don't know if anybody could have really been successful at. But okay, you go and you learn. That applies to candidates that I'm interested in, that I'm intrigued by, like Mike Brown. But I should also apply that to Mark Jackson. There's no reason necessarily for me from the outside looking in to say that a guy like this isn't capable of learning from his mistakes the first time around, assuming he acknowledges them. And so that, again, gets back to the process question. There isn't anybody to me that I feel like should or shouldn't be on the list based on fairly arbitrary qualifications like that. He's been a head coach, failed the first time. He's never been a head coach, can't learn on the... Well, no, some guys probably can't take the Lakers as a first job. Some guys probably can. You know, I mean, Juwan Howard seems like the kind of guy, were he interested in coming from Michigan, and he's not, that would be. Darvin Ham seems like a guy who's perfectly capable of stepping into that. Ty Lue ran into that problem in Cleveland, by the way, and won a title. So it's like guys can do it.
Nick Nurse, Steve Kerr, Paul Westhead, Pat Riley. I mean, there are plenty of examples of first-time head coaches finding success, just like there are plenty of examples of first-time head coaches failing pretty miserably. There are also plenty of examples of third or fourth try head coaches really getting it right, and third or fourth time head coaches showing why they're about to be on their fifth try if somebody hires them.
Why does this keep happening?
It's all over the place.
Yeah. And you just, and since most of these guys are not transcendent, they are not Spo, they are not able to mold just about anything you give them into.
But here's what makes it tricky. Spo wasn't Spo till he was Spo.
There's no question. And he entered a culture.
Spo was the guy that LeBron
won and fired, but he had Pat Riley as an ethic and a backbone, whatever. This, which gets to, we had that a lot of conversations about culture. We talked about it with Kevin on Monday's show. Like, this is where that stuff really matters, because if you have a strong and consistent culture to your franchise that you can establish, that runs through your stars, that runs through your supporting players, that runs through your coaching staff, that runs through everything. You can take a guy who may not be perfect for the job, may not be a transcendent top 5% candidate, because definitionally there aren't very many of those people, and in any given year, none of them may be on the market. You can take a coach who needs context and give him the tools. And if you give a good coach the tools to succeed, as we saw in 2020 with Frank Vogel, they'll do a good job. Most of these guys will. Most of the good ones. It's only the really great ones that you can give lesser material to, and they'll still do a good job. And so that's my thinking. All right, we'll see everybody Wednesday.